Barron Trump, the enigmatic young titan of a dynasty that thrives on chaos, stepped into a moment so astonishing, so hilariously unhinged, that it's already being whispered as the greatest public showdown ever witnessed. Picture this: a scorching day in Los Angeles, a charity event humming with goodwill, and then, out of nowhere, a Zelensky fanatic, wild-eyed and armed with a megaphone, turned it all into a battlefield of epic proportions. What happened was beyond amazing, a twist so jaw-dropping it left the world gasping, laughing, and arguing all at once. This wasn't just a clash. It was a spectacle that rewrote the rules of confrontation, and you're about to dive into a story so wild, so divisive, that it'll keep you hooked until the very last word. Barron Trump arrived in Los Angeles under a sky so blue it seemed to mock the tension brewing beneath it. At 18, he was no longer the lanky shadow of his father's presidency, but a 6'7" force of nature, his lean frame cutting through the world with a quiet intensity that belied his youth. His sharp blue eyes, inherited from a lineage of unyielding ambition, swept over the sprawling parking lot of the Los Angeles Convention Center, where a massive food drive was unfolding. This wasn't a political stunt or a headline grab. It was personal, a cause tied to youth shelters he'd supported in silence for years. Dressed in a crisp white shirt and tailored jeans, he stepped out of a gleaming black SUV, his long strides carrying him toward a scene buzzing with life, oblivious to the storm about to break. The air thrummed with activity as volunteers darted between food trucks piled high with canned goods and fresh produce, their aprons stained with the sweat of a good day's work. Towering banners snapped in the breeze, emblazoned with bold letters, "Feeding Hope, one meal at a time." Celebrities dotted the crowd, actors with perfect tans, musicians in oversized sunglasses, posing for photos with locals who clutched grocery bags filled with donations. Media vans lined the edges, their satellite dishes piercing the sky, while drones whirred overhead, beaming the event to millions. A stage stood at the heart of it all, draped in patriotic bunting, a podium waiting for Barron to deliver a speech that would cap the day. The crowd swelled, hundreds strong, some waving faded red hats, others snapping selfies, all drawn by the rare sight of a Trump stepping into the light on his own terms. Barron moved through the chaos with a grace that seemed almost rehearsed, his height making him a beacon amid the bustle. Volunteers swarmed him briefly, offering water and quick updates, their voices a blur against the hum of excitement. He nodded, his face a mask of calm, though his eyes flickered with something unreadable, anticipation, perhaps, or the weight of a name that never let him rest. This isn't just a story, it's a revelation. And if you want to see how far it goes, subscribe now before it disappears. The sun beat down, its heat rippling off the asphalt, turning the parking lot into a shimmering mirage of goodwill and glamour. Cameras tracked his every step, their lenses glinting like predators stalking prey, while influencers jostled for position, their live streams crackling with commentary. Barron's here, tallest Trump yet. And this is gonna be huge. The energy was electric, a perfect storm of charity and spectacle, until it was. Lurking at the crowd's edge, a figure stood apart, his presence a jagged tear in the day's bright fabric. Clad in a faded black hoodie with a Ukrainian flag patch stitched crookedly onto the sleeve, the Zelensky fan watched Barron with the intensity of a man possessed. He was a wiry figure in his 30s, his face carved by sleepless nights and a fire that burned too hot to contain. Online, he was Kiev's Avenger, a digital warrior whose ex-posts raged against American apathy and the Trump legacy with a venom that bordered on obsession. His hands fidgeted with a scratched megaphone, its weight a promise of disruption, as he edged closer to the stage. This wasn't a spontaneous outburst. He tracked Barron's movements for weeks, waiting for a moment ripe with eyes and ears to unleash his fury. The stage loomed ahead, its red, white, and blue bunting fluttering like a challenge. Barron ascended the steps, his shadow stretching long across the platform, a silent giant preparing to speak. The crowd hushed, their phones raised in unison, a sea of screens capturing the moment. Volunteers stacked crates of apples and bread behind him, a backdrop of abundance that framed his towering form. Security lingered nearby, their radios buzzing with routine chatter, their eyes scanning the crowd but missing the threat weaving through it. The Zelensky fan slipped closer, his hoodie snagging on shoulders as he pushed past distracted onlookers, his pulse racing with the thrill of what he was about to do. Barron reached the podium, his hands resting lightly on its edges, his gaze sweeping the faces before him. The air thickened with expectation, the drones circling tighter, their hum a low pulse beneath the crowd's murmur. The Zelensky fan stopped just short of the stage, his boots scuffing the asphalt, his megaphone clutched like a grenade. His thumb hovered over the trigger, his breath shallow and quick, as he locked eyes with Barron, or so he imagined, through the glare of the sun. The crowd didn't see him yet, their focus fixed on the young Trump, but the shift was coming, a crack in the day's foundation that would split it wide open. Then it happened. The Zelensky fan pressed the button and a sharp, grating crackle tore through the air, a sound so sudden it jolted the crowd like a thunderclap. Heads whipped around, phones wavered, and the drones tilted, their lenses zeroing in on the figure now thrusting himself into the spotlight. Barron's hands stilled on the podium, his eyes narrowing slightly, but he didn't flinch. The stage was set, the players poised, and what followed would ignite a firestorm that no one, not Barron, not the Zelensky fan, not the millions watching, could have predicted. The calm was gone, replaced by a tension so raw it seemed to hum in the bones of everyone present, a prelude to a clash that would echo far beyond this sun-soaked day. The echo of Barron's words hung in the air like smoke, thick and elusive, curling around the crowd and leaving them grasping for meaning. His voice, though soft, had pierced the clamor with surgical precision, a single, deliberate sentence that landed like a stone in a still pond, its ripples spreading outward in waves of bewilderment. The drones whirred overhead, their lenses glinting as they beamed the moment to screens across the globe, while the crowd stood frozen, their faces a gallery of confusion and fascination. Some tilted their heads, replaying the words in their minds. Others muttered to neighbors, their voices low and urgent, as if whispering might unravel the mystery. The media vans buzzed with activity, reporters stumbling over each other to dissect the cryptic phrase, their microphones trembling with the weight of a story that refused to clarify itself. At the crowd's edge, the Zelensky fan twisted in the grip of security, his wrists straining against the cuffs now biting into his skin. His chest heaved, sweat streaking down his face, but his eyes burned with a fire undimmed by restraint. He'd heard Barron's words too, and they'd struck him like a match to dry tinder. His head snapped up, his mouth twisting into a snarl as he lunged forward, only to be yanked back by the guards. His torn hoodie flapped in the breeze, the Ukrainian flag patch a tattered emblem of his cause, and his unamplified shouts clawed at the air, raw and guttural, demanding answers. The crowd nearest him flinched, some stepping back as if his rage might spill over, while others craned their necks, torn between the stage and the activists' unraveling defiance. Barron remained at the podium, his posture unchanged, his hand still resting lightly on its surface as if anchoring himself to the eye of the storm. The sun framed him in a halo of light, his sharp features etched against the chaos, and his silence in the wake of his statement felt louder than the Zelensky fans' cries. His eyes swept the crowd again, slow and deliberate, taking in the fractured sea of faces, some flushed with anger, others pale with uncertainty, a few alight with curiosity. The volunteers, still clutching their crates, exchanged nervous glances, their earlier efficiency replaced by a stillness that mirrored the crowd's unease. Even the celebrities, perched in their VIP enclave, shifted uncomfortably, their sunglasses slipping as they whispered among themselves, their polished facades cracking under the weight of the unexpected. The tension splintered further as a new sound rose, a low chant from a pocket of the crowd near the barricades. It started small, a handful of voices, but grew with each repetition, fists pumping the air in rhythm. "Let him speak! Let him speak!" They were the Zelensky fan sympathizers, their faces taut with conviction, their makeshift signs, scribbled pleas for Ukraine, thrust high above their heads. The chant rolled toward the stage like a wave, crashing against a countersurge of boos and shouts from Barron's defenders, their voices thick with indignation. "Get him out! Enough!" The air thickened with the clash, a visceral tug-of-war that split the parking lot into warring factions, their noise rising until it drowned out the hum of the drones. Security tightened their hold on the Zelensky fan, their shoulders hunching as they braced for the crowd's volatility. His thrashing slowed, but his gaze locked onto Barron, a predator sizing up prey, and his lips moved in a silent vow, something fierce, something personal, that sent a shiver through the nearest guard. The trampled leaflet, now a muddy smear on the asphalt, seemed to pulse with the memory of his earlier fury, its image of a war-torn child a silent witness to the escalating drama. The megaphone, still abandoned where it had fallen, gleamed dully in the sun, its scratches catching the light like scars of a fight unfinished. Barron's shadow shifted as he leaned forward slightly, the first hint of movement since his cryptic words. The crowd hushed, their shouts fading into a ragged silence, every eye snapping back to the stage. His fingers tightened on the podium's edges, a subtle flex of control, and his lips parted as if to speak again. The drones dipped lower, their lenses hungry for what might come next, while the media vans, satellite dishes tilted like sunflowers chasing light. The Zelensky fan stilled, his breath catching, his fury suspended in the heartbeat before Barron's next move. The crowd leaned in, a collective inhale that sucked the air from the space, their anticipation a living thing, coiled and ready to spring. But Barron didn't speak. Instead, he stepped back, his hands falling to his sides, and turned his head, not toward the crowd, not toward the activist, but to the horizon beyond the parking lot, where the sky met the earth in a haze of heat. His profile was sharp, unyielding, and the gesture felt deliberate, a dismissal of the chaos that left the crowd reeling. The silence stretched, taut and unbearable, until a single shout broke it, a woman's voice shrill with frustration. What does that mean? It was the question on every mind unanswered, and it ignited a fresh wave of noise, cries, demands, a cacophony of voices clawing for clarity. The Zelensky fan seized the moment, wrenching free of one guard's grip long enough to lunge forward, his cuffed hands raised like a banner. His shout was a jagged blade, slicing through the uproar, a final challenge hurled at Barron's retreating figure. Security swarmed him again, dragging him back with renewed force, but his eyes never left the stage, burning with a promise of retribution. The crowd surged, some rushing the barricades, others turning on each other, their division erupting into shoves and shouts as the charity event dissolved into pandemonium. Barron stood motionless, his back to the chaos, his gaze fixed on that distant line, an enigma wrapped in silence as the world around him burned. And then from the edge of the parking lot, a new shadow emerged, a figure in a dark coat, unnoticed until now, slipping through the crowd with purpose. The drones missed it, their focus locked on the stage, but the figure moved closer, a quiet threat threading through the madness, its intent unclear but its presence undeniable. The Zelensky fan saw it too, his head snapping toward it, his expression shifting from rage to recognition, and then to something darker, something that hinted at a deeper game unfolding beneath the surface. The crowd remained oblivious, lost in their own storm, as the figure paused, its eyes fixed on Barron, setting the stage for a collision no one saw coming. The haze of smoke clung to the parking lot like a shroud, its gray tendrils curling around the abandoned food crates and the trampled remains of the charity event. Barron's silhouette cut through the chaos as he stepped off the stage, the classified document gripped tightly in one hand, its pages rustling in the wind. His strides were measured, deliberate, each step a silent declaration that he was no longer just the host of a food drive. He was a player in a game few understood. The crowd parted instinctively, their shouts fading into a stunned murmur as they watched him move toward the row of black SUVs parked at the lot's edge. The drones trailed him, their lenses glinting like vultures circling prey, broadcasting every angle of his retreat to a world now hanging on his next move. Behind him, the political operative lingered on the stage, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the disarray. His grim expression softened into something unreadable as he scanned the crowd, his eyes lingering on the spot where the Zelensky fan had vanished. The activist was a ghost now, swallowed by the throng, but his presence still lingered, a spark that had ignited this wildfire of secrets. The operative adjusted his cufflinks, a subtle gesture that belied the weight of what he'd just handed Barron, and then turned away, disappearing into the haze as swiftly as he'd arrived. The crowd barely noticed, their attention fixed on the tall figure striding toward the vehicles, the key in his pocket, an invisible thread tying him to the enigma of the day. The figure in the dark coat watched from a distance, perched on the hood of a rusted pickup at the lot's perimeter. Their hat brim cast a shadow over their face, but their posture, relaxed yet coiled, like a predator awaiting its moment, spoke volumes. They'd seen the document, the key's delivery, the operative's arrival, and now Barron's departure. Their gloved fingers tapped a slow rhythm against the truck's dented metal, a metronome counting down to something inevitable. The smoke didn't reach them here, but the faint crackle of burning debris carried on the wind, a reminder of the chaos they'd helped unleash. They tilted their head, tracking Barron's path, and then slid off the hood, vanishing into the crowd's fringes as if they'd never been there. Barron reached the lead SUV, its tinted windows reflecting the flickering lights of the drones overhead. A security detail, 3 men in dark suits, their earpieces buzzing with static, flanked him, their movements crisp and synchronized. One opened the rear door, but Barron paused, his hand hovering over the handle. His sharp blue eyes flicked back to the parking lot, sweeping the sea of faces, the rising smoke, the media vans now swarming like ants around the stage. The classified document felt heavy in his grip, its contents a ticking bomb he'd chosen to detonate by raising it for all to see. He slipped it inside his jacket, the key pressing against his thigh through the pocket fabric, and climbed into the vehicle without a word. The door slammed shut, a definitive punctuation to his exit, and the SUV's engine roared to life. The crowd erupted anew, their voices a chaotic blend of awe, anger, and desperation. "What's in the file?" they shouted, their phones thrust high, capturing the convoy as it peeled away from the lot. "Who's behind this?" The drones followed, their feeds streaming live to millions, but the tinted windows offered no answers, just the faint outline of Barron's profile, his jaw set, his gaze fixed forward. The media vans scrambled to keep pace, their tires screeching against the asphalt, while reporters barked into microphones, piecing together fragments of the day. The Zelensky fans outburst, the mysterious figure, the key, the smoke, and now this document that had turned a charity event into a global spectacle. Back in the parking lot, the smoke thickened, its source still unclear, a smoldering truck perhaps, or something deliberately set. Volunteers raced toward it, their aprons flapping as they shouted for water, for help, their earlier mission of feeding the hungry now a distant memory. The crowd thinned at the edges, some fleeing the acrid air, others pressing closer, drawn by the allure of unraveling the mystery. A child's shoe lay abandoned near the stage, its laces tangled with a torn Zelensky leaflet, a silent testament to the day's unraveling. The drones hovered lower, their lenses catching glints of metal in the debris, shards from the explosion, or perhaps something more deliberate, planted to ensure the chaos endured. Inside the SUV, Barron sat in silence, the hum of the engine a steady counterpoint to the storm outside. He pulled the key from his pocket, turning it over in his hands, its engraved symbols catching the dim light filtering through the tinted glass. The patterns were old, intricate, a cipher from a past he'd thought buried, now resurrected in the glare of the present. His thumb traced the edges, his mind racing to connect it to the document nestled against his chest. The operative's whispered words echoed in his ears, too faint for the drones but sharp enough to cut. "They're watching. This is only the beginning." Who they were, He didn't yet know, or perhaps he did, and the truth was a weight he wasn't ready to carry. The convoy sped through the city, weaving past traffic, the drones struggling to keep up as buildings blurred into streaks of glass and steel. Barron's phone buzzed in his pocket, a single vibration he ignored, likely his team or his family or the press demanding answers he wouldn't give. He leaned back, the key still in his hand, and closed his eyes for a moment, letting the pieces of the puzzle shift in his mind. The Zelensky fan had been the spark, the figure in the coat the fuel, and the operative the match, but the fire itself, that was something larger, something that had been smoldering long before today. Outside, the world spun into a frenzy. Social media exploded with hashtags, #BarronKey, classified chaos, each post a wild guess at the document's contents, the key's purpose, the figure's identity. Pundits dissected the footage, zooming in on Barron's fleeting expressions, the operative's grim demeanor, the smoke curling from the truck. The Zelensky fan's face, captured mid-shout, became a meme, a symbol of defiance or derangement depending on who wielded it. And somewhere in the digital ether, a grainy photo surfaced. The figure in the dark coat, caught mid-stride, their hat brim low, a faint scar visible on their exposed wrist. The image spread like wildfire, but no name emerged, no answers, just more questions piling onto the heap. The SUV slowed as it approached a gated compound, its iron bars looming against the skyline. Security waved them through, the gates clanging shut behind, sealing Barron from the chaos he'd left behind. He stepped out, the key now tucked away, the document still hidden beneath his jacket. The air here was cleaner, the smoke a distant memory, but the tension followed him, clinging like a second skin. He glanced skyward, noting the absence of drones, privacy at last, or at least the illusion of it. His security detail fanned out, their eyes scanning the perimeter, but Barron's focus was inward, on the next move in a game he hadn't chosen to play. Then a sound, a faint rustle from the shadows beyond the gate. Barron turned, his hand instinctively brushing the pocket where the key rested. A flicker of movement caught his eye, a silhouette too brief to identify vanishing into the dusk. The figure in the dark coat, the Zelensky fan, or someone new drawn by the document's reveal. His pulse quickened, but his face remained a mask betraying nothing. The security team noticed too late, their radios crackling as they fumbled to respond. But the moment was gone, the intruder, if that's what they were, lost to the night. Barron exhaled, a slow release of breath, and turned toward the compound's entrance. The day had begun with a simple goal, feed the hungry, raise some funds, but it had spiraled into a labyrinth of secrets, each twist tightening the noose around him. The key, the document, the figure, the smoke, all pieces of a puzzle he'd only begun to solve. You felt that, didn't you? That was no ordinary moment. If it hit you, hit like and let's keep going. He pushed open the door, the weight of the unknown pressing against his shoulders, and stepped inside, leaving the world to speculate, to chase shadows, to wait for his next move. But as the door closed, a final image lingered, the figure in the dark coat standing at the lot's edge, watching the SUV disappear. Their gloved hands slipped into their pocket, pulling out a second key, identical to Barron, its symbols glinting in the fading light. They turned it over once, then melted into the dusk, their purpose unspoken, their next step a promise of chaos yet to come. The day wasn't over, not for Barron, not for the world, and the shadows were only beginning to converge. The compound's door thudded shut behind Barron Trump, its echo swallowed by the stillness of the night within. He stood motionless in the foyer, the map's coarse paper crackling in his grip, its coordinates burning into his mind like a brand. The words midnight, come alone, bring the key looped through his thoughts, each repetition tightening the knot in his chest. The key itself sat heavy in his pocket, its intricate symbols pressing against his thigh, a relic of secrets he'd only begun to unravel. He glanced at the clock on the wall. 9:47 p.m. 2 hours and 13 minutes to decide, to act, to step into a game whose rules remained maddeningly out of reach. He moved back to the study, his footsteps deliberate, the marble floor reflecting the dim glow of recessed lights overhead. The room felt smaller now, its walls closing in as the weight of the day's events settled over him. He dropped into the leather chair, the map unfolding on the desk beside the classified document he'd retrieved from its hidden drawer. The dossier's pages stared back at him, their redacted lines and cryptic references to the Kiev initiative offering no clarity, only more questions. He traced the map's jagged lines with a finger, rough, hand-drawn, leading to a pinpoint deep in the California desert, a place of dunes and shadows far from the media's prying eyes. It was a summons, yes, but also a lure, and Barron knew the difference all too well. Outside, the night thickened, the distant clamor of reporters, and drones a muffled hum beyond the compound's fortified walls. The media storm showed no signs of abating. Screens worldwide flickered with his name, with grainy footage of the Zelensky fans' outburst, with speculation about the document clutched in his hands as he'd fled the charity event. The world demanded answers he didn't have, and now this map thrust him toward a reckoning he couldn't predict. His phone buzzed incessantly on the desk, missed calls from advisors, texts from security, a single message from his mother, "Stay safe, call me." He silenced it, his focus narrowing to the desert's call. Barron leaned forward, his sharp blue eyes darting between the map and the key. The symbols etched into its surface, curved, ancient, matched the cipher in the dossier, a clue he hadn't yet cracked. He pulled the document closer, flipping to the appendix, where a faded diagram sketched a lock mechanism, its design eerily similar to the key's contours. A vault, perhaps, buried in the sand, holding truths tied to Ukraine, to his family, to the figure in the dark coat who tossed him this gauntlet. His mind raced. Could this be a trap set by enemies of his father's legacy, or a test from allies cloaked in shadow? The figure's identical key gnawed at him, a mirror to his own, suggesting a shared purpose or a rival claim. The compound's silence shattered as a faint rumble vibrated through the floor, a helicopter, its blades slicing the night air, circling low. Barron crossed to the window, peeling back the blackout curtains to see its silhouette against the moonlit sky. No markings, no lights, just a black shape hovering with intent. His security team would spot it soon, but its presence confirmed what he'd suspected. He wasn't alone in this, and the clock was ticking faster than he'd thought. He stepped back, his jaw tightening, the map's coordinates now a pulse in his veins. Retreat wasn't an option. His father's voice echoed in his memory, a lesson from childhood. Never back down, Barron. They'll eat you alive. He moved with purpose, grabbing a black hoodie from a closet and slipping the map, key, and document into a slim leather satchel. The study's bookshelf loomed before him, its hidden passage a secret he'd discovered years ago, a relic of his family's paranoia or foresight. He pressed a concealed latch, and the shelves slid aside, revealing a narrow tunnel lined with cold concrete. It led to a garage beneath the compound, where a matte black Jeep waited, untraceable, its keys always in the ignition, a contingency he'd never thought he'd need until now. He climbed in, the engine roaring to life, and gunned it through an underground exit that spilled onto a back road, away from the media's glare and the helicopter's watchful eye. The desert stretched ahead, its vastness swallowing the city's lights as Barron pushed the Jeep westward. The dashboard clock glowed 10:32 p.m., 90 minutes to midnight, 90 minutes to answers or oblivion. His hands gripped the wheel, knuckles white, but his face remained calm, a mask honed by years in the spotlight. At 18, he was no stranger to pressure, but this was different, a plunge into a world of shadows his family had always skirted, a world now dragging him in with both hands. The key jostled in the satchel beside him, its weight a tether to the unknown, while the map's crude lines guided him deeper into the night. Miles away, the figure in the dark coat stood atop a dune, their silhouette stark against the star-strewn sky. They watched the horizon through binoculars, tracking a faint dust trail that marked Barron's approach. Their phone buzzed again, a new message flashing. "He's moving. Ready the vault." They nodded to a shadow nearby, a second figure, clad in tactical gear, who vanished into the sand to prepare. The dark coat's owner slipped the identical key from their pocket, its symbols glinting in the moonlight, and turned toward a metal hatch half buried in the dune. It creaked open, revealing a ladder descending into darkness, a chamber where secrets waited, secrets Barron would either claim or die for. Back on the road, Barron's Jeep hit a rough patch, the tires jolting over uneven terrain as pavement gave way to dirt. The coordinates loomed closer, a blinking dot on the GPS he'd synced to the map. His pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the thrill of the chase, the puzzle's pieces snapping into place. Yet doubt gnawed at him. What if the vault held not answers, but a betrayal? What if the figure's key unlocked a truth he couldn't face? He shoved the thoughts aside, his father's voice louder now. "You're a Trump. Act like it." The clock ticked to 11:15 p.m., 45 minutes to midnight. The desert wind howled, kicking up sand that stung his windshield, but Barron pressed on, the Jeep's headlights carving a path through the void. Ahead, a faint glow flickered, a signal, a trap, or both. He slowed, his eyes narrowing as shapes emerged from the haze. A cluster of dunes, a metal hatch glinting in the sand, and the figure in the dark coat, standing like a sentinel, waiting. Their hand rested on the hatch, the second key raised in a silent challenge, daring Barron to descend. He killed the engine, the silence crashing over him like a wave. The satchel hung heavy at his side, the key within it a match to the figure's own. He stepped out, the desert cold seeping through his hoodie, and faced the figure across the sand. No words passed between them, only the weight of their shared enigma, the vault below, a Pandora's box neither could ignore. The figure gestured to the hatch, then vanished down its ladder, leaving Barron alone with the night and a choice: follow into the abyss or turn back and lose everything. The clock struck 11:30 p.m. Barron's hand tightened on the satchel, his breath steady as he approached the hatch. He glanced at the sky, the helicopter's distant thrum a reminder of the world he'd left behind, then down at the darkness below. The desert held its breath, the midnight hour closing in, and Barron Trump descended, the ladder's rungs cold against his palms, the vault's secrets pulling him deeper into a game he was only beginning to understand. The Jeep's tires tore into the desert sand, spitting grit into the night as Barron floored the accelerator. The vault's hatch, now a distant scar in the earth, faded in the rearview mirror, its secrets, and the two figures locked in their deadly dance, buried beneath a cascade of dust and steel. His hands gripped the wheel, knuckles white, the satchel slung across his chest, a leaden weight against his ribs. Inside, the classified document rustled faintly, its redacted pages now a lifeline and a curse, whispering truths he couldn't yet fully grasp. The key in his pocket pressed against his thigh, its symbols etched into his mind, symbols that matched the others, binding him to the woman, the Zelensky fan, and the masked newcomer in a game he hadn't chosen. The desert stretched endless and black, the stars above cold and indifferent, offering no guidance. Barron's breath steadied, but his pulse hammered, a relentless drumbeat fueled by adrenaline and the weight of what he'd seen. The video on the tablet, his father's shadowed figure, the Zelensky fan's bunker transmissions, the Kiev initiative's hidden machinery, spun through his thoughts like a reel of film stuck on repeat. His family wasn't just entangled. They were architects, their hands stained with ink from deals struck in blood-soaked rooms. And the Zelensky fan, Kiev's avenger, was no mere disruptor. He was a soldier, a hunter, his key a claim to the same power Barron now clutched. A flicker on the horizon snapped him from his spiral, a thin plume of dust rising against the moon's pale glow. He squinted, easing off the gas, the Jeep's engine growling low as he scanned the emptiness. The plume thickened, resolving into headlights, 2, then 3, then a half dozen, converging from the east, their beams slicing through the dark like blades. Barron's gut twisted. This wasn't a rescue party. He yanked the wheel, veering off the faint track he'd followed, the Jeep lurching over dunes as he aimed for a cluster of rock formations jutting from the sand like broken teeth. The headlights shifted, tracking him, their pursuit silent but relentless. He killed the engine behind a jagged outcrop, the Jeep's shadow melding with the stone. The satchel thumped against his chest as he slid out, boots sinking into the sand, and crouched low, peering through a gap in the rock. The vehicles, black SUVs, unmarked, their windows tinted, fanned out, engines idling as they formed a loose perimeter. Doors swung open, disgorging figures in tactical vests, their movements precise, military. One carried a rifle, its barrel glinting faintly. Another held a device, a scanner, its screen pulsing green as it swept the terrain. Barron's breath caught. They were hunting the key, the document, or him. Maybe all three. He pressed deeper into the shadow, his mind racing. The vault's collapse couldn't have summoned them this fast, not unless they'd been waiting, watching, primed for the moment the console activated. The woman's scar, the newcomer's blade, the Zelensky fan's bloodied defiance, all pieces of a machine that had been grinding long before he'd stepped into the desert. He pulled the document from the satchel, its edges curling in the dry air, and scanned the final page again. Kyiv Initiative, Phase 2, Containment. The words loomed beneath a map, its coordinates smeared but pointing somewhere north, beyond the border. Containment of what? The war, the keys, his family's legacy. A crackle broke the silence, a radio from the nearest SUV, its static slicing through the night. The scanner wielder paused, head tilting as if listening, then gestured sharply. The team tightened their formation, advancing toward the rocks, their boots crunching sand in a rhythm that echoed the vault's countdown. Barron's hand slid to his pocket, the key's warmth a faint comfort against the chill creeping up his spine. He couldn't fight them, not outnumbered, not unarmed, but he couldn't surrender the truth either. He edged along the outcrop, eyes darting for an escape when a new sound froze him. A low rumble, not from the SUVs, but from beneath the sand. The ground trembled, a vibration that rattled pebbles and sent a ripple through the dunes. The operatives halted, weapons snapping up, their scanner flaring red. Barron ducked lower, heart pounding as the rumble grew into a roar. Then the desert erupted, a geyser of sand 50 yards away, metal screeching as something massive breached the surface. A hatch, twin to the vaults, yawned open, vomiting dust and a figure clad in black. The newcomer, their mask cracked, one arm bloodied, staggered out, the fourth key clutched in their fist. They swayed, then straightened, spotting the SUVs and breaking into a limping run toward the west. The operatives pivoted, shouting orders lost in the wind, and opened fire. Bullets chewed the sand, tracer rounds streaking like comets, but the newcomer dove behind a dune, vanishing into the night. Barron seized the chaos, bolting from the rocks to the jeep, the satchel slapping his side. He threw himself inside, the engine snarling awake, and peeled out, tires spinning as he aimed south, away from the SUVs, the newcomer, the second vault. The headlights swung after him, but the desert swallowed his trail, the outcrop shielding him as he pushed the jeep to its limit. Miles blurred past, the pursuit fading into specks of light, then nothing. Barron's chest heaved, sweat stinging his eyes, but he didn't slow until the horizon swallowed the last trace of danger. He pulled into a shallow ravine, cutting the engine, and slumped against the seat, the satchel cradled in his lap. The document's map stared up at him, its smeared coordinates a taunt, north where answers waited, or doom. The key burned in his pocket, its purpose still a riddle, but its power undeniable. Then a glint caught his eye, a reflection in the ravine's shadow. He tensed, leaning forward, and saw it. A motorcycle half buried in sand, its frame scorched but intact. Beside it a trampled leaflet fluttered, its ink smeared but legible. Kyiv forever, the Zelensky fans' rallying cry from the charity event. Barron's blood ran cold. He stepped out, approaching the wreckage, and spotted tracks, fresh, leading north toward the map's blurred endpoint. The fan was alive, his key in play, his mission unbroken. Distant whine pierced the silence, rotors faint but closing fast. Barron glanced skyward, the stars winking out as a helicopter's silhouette loomed, its searchlight sweeping the desert. He grabbed the satchel, the document and key, his only weapons, and gunned the jeep north, following the tracks. The chopper banked, its beam narrowing on him, a predator locking onto prey. The ravine fell behind, the desert unfolding into a battlefield of sand and secrets, Barron racing toward a reckoning he couldn't escape. The searchlight pinned him, the rotors deafening, and the jeep's dashboard flickered, A warning light, then a signal, pulsing in time with the key in his pocket. The document's map glowed faintly in the dark, its coordinates sharpening as he drove. North 35.6, west 115, to a destination, a trap, or the end game. The chopper dropped lower, a hatch sliding open, a figure leaning out with a rifle trained on him. Barron swerved, sand spraying, and floored it, the tracks ahead merging with his path, the Zelensky fan's shadow drawing closer. The desert night swallowed them all, hunter, hunted, and the truth between them, racing toward a collision that would burn the world or remake it. The desert air hung heavy as the woman and her team retreated, their silhouettes fading into the swirling sand kicked up by the helicopter's ascent. Barron Trump stood motionless in the bunker's doorway, the document, Kiev Initiative, disarmament protocol, clutched in his hand, its edges crinkling in the wind. The drones lingered overhead, their red lights blinking like predatory eyes, but their feeds were silent now, severed by his override. The Zelensky fan lay slumped against the console, defeated, his breath ragged, his crusade undone. Barron stepped outside, the cold biting at his skin. The Jeep waited, battered but unbroken, a testament to the night's chaos. He slid into the driver's seat, the key still warm from the console, and let his gaze drift to the horizon. The stars were brighter now, unclouded by the searchlight's glare, and for the first time in hours he felt the weight of silence. The world had seen it all, the chase, the bunker, the missile, the truth. His family's name, once a shield and a burden, was now redefined by his actions. He hadn't just stopped a launch, he'd exposed a shadow war, one that stretched beyond the desert, beyond the Kiev Initiative, into corners he couldn't yet fathom. The engine roared to life and Barron drove, the coordinates, north 35.6, west 115.2, etched into his memory as a scar of victory. He didn't look back at the bunker, at the Zelensky fan, at the ghosts of what might have been. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was his. Days later, the footage flooded every screen, newsrooms, phones, billboards. Barron Trump disarms Kiev Initiative threat, the headline screamed, while pundits debated the grainy images of the bunker, the missile, the standoff. The Zelensky fan vanished into custody, his real name a footnote, his megaphone silenced. The woman with the scar remained a phantom, her smile a promise of battles yet to come. Barron watched it unfold from a safe house, the satchel at his side, its contents now public domain. His phone buzzed, messages from allies, warnings from enemies, questions from a world that suddenly knew his name. He ignored them all, his eyes fixed on the sunrise beyond the window. He'd entered the desert a shadow of his lineage, a young man chasing answers. He emerged something else, a reckoning, a force, a Trump unbound by the past. The Kiev Initiative was wounded, not dead, and others would rise to fill its void. But Barron was ready. The key in his pocket, the document in his hand, they were more than relics now. They were his claim to a fight that was just beginning. The sun crested the hills, painting the sky gold. Barron Trump smiled, a quiet, determined curve of his lips, and stepped into the light. If you enjoyed this story, there's another video on screen right now. Go ahead and give it a look for an even more astonishing tale. And don't forget, we'll have many more uplifting and dramatic stories coming your way. So make sure you subscribe to our channel, that way you'll never miss our newest uploads.